drama has a lot to be thankful for this Thanksgiving. So, because we have two fabulous guests, starting with Kimberly Faye Greenberg, and then we will talk to Matthew Dalton. So Kimberly Faye Greenberg, we saw in Fanny, Brice. But before that, back at the old Chashama on 42nd Street, I saw her with Brian Childers doing Danny and Sylvia. We have seen her do Fringe with TNC people, with Lissa Mora and Richard West and Tim Riabalto. She's been with the Peculiar Works and Christmas Wrappings. She knows Stephen McCaslin. She's done a lot of stuff with him at 54 Below and with his plays. So, and also Broadway Meows with Seth Beese and Hirsch. So we have known Kimberly forever and ever and a day, and we love her.
Wow, you're going way back. It's amazing.
Yes. This is your life, Kimberly.
It is my life. It's so crazy.
So how did you go from like discovering Sylvia Fine all the way to Fanny Brice?
Well, crazy story. She's always kind of been on the, Fanny Brice particularly, has been on the periphery for quite a long time. Before I did Sylvia, a theater company had asked if I would be willing to play Fanny in their Funny Girl. And they told me to study the role for a year because the production would have been a year later. Now I did, and that was my first foray into Fanny. And funny enough, guess who didn't book the part? Me, I didn't book the part. However, good things come because, you know, the universe has a funny way. And I actually, very shortly after not booking that, I ended up booking Sylvia in Danny and Sylvia in a show called Kid from Brooklyn, which was the version before it became Danny and Sylvia. And that's kind of led me to Danny and Sylvia off Broadway. And then somebody saw me in that playing Sylvia Fine and was like, I have a one-person Fanny Brice show. Would you be willing to workshop it? Workshop that show for a year through a series of events, ended up opening that show off Broadway. People ended up seeing me play Fanny. I ended up in Fanny and several other shows, and then venues started asking me for more Fanny. So I ended up creating my own show, and here we are like 8 or 9 years later with Fabulous Fanny, the songs and stories of Fanny Brice. So that is my journey. It's been a long road, and it's just kind of funny. She keeps like circling back, which is great. I mean, she's always kind of there on the edge of my life now.
Did you know anything about Fanny Brice before all this?
Well, I grew up listening to Barbara, but my mom had all the records, but I didn't realize that a lot of her songs were originally Fanny Brice tunes. Like I wouldn't have had any consciousness of that. And in high school, when I was learning that I wanted to be an actress and I was in drama and musical theater and all those great things, my teacher did say to me at that point, well, you're Jewish, you look like her, you want to do musical theater, you should look at Fanny Brice and Funny Girls.
What is there left about Fanny that you haven't discovered yet? Is there anything you'd like to cover that you haven't really done yet?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people don't know that she did write her own memoir before she died. Oh. And it's not published, which again, I've had many conversations with numerous individuals about why it hasn't been published. She wrote it because at that point in time, they knew that they wanted to create Funny Girl. And so they wanted to make sure they had her story in writing. So she dictated it, and then it was passed along to all the creative teams so that they could sort of come up with their version of what they wanted Funny Girl to be like. And it ended up being donated to the New York Public Library of Performing Arts. So it's in a research section there. And there's a lot in that you would never really know, because most of the stuff that came out in Funny Girl was kind of a watered down version, because Nick Arnstein was still alive and they didn't want to risk him like suing the estate because he was going to look bad. So the cool thing now is that I've been able to sort of bring all that stuff to the surface because now it's all public domain. Her life is public domain. So it's been cool because I get to tell people a little bit more about Nick and his endeavors, obviously, get to share a little more personal stories that were in her memoir, but that weren't publicly shared. Like she has this crazy story. It's not in the streaming show currently online, but it's in I have a couple of different versions and lengths. And she actually bought a brassiere shop to, yes, crazy story, totally true. She brought a brassiere shop way down on 2nd Avenue on the Lower East Side, so that she could use it as a cover when Nick was trying to escape the law, so that he could call her and they could talk, because she didn't know where he was. So that was the way that they could sort of chat. So she literally bought a brassiere shop at that point in time. So there's lots of like crazy things that she did, and even in our time it would have been like frowned upon in some way or another. I mean, the fact that she was married 3 times, most people don't know she had a first husband for like 3 days and then she divorced him. So there's lots of little stories like that I'm able to share. And I'd have to go back and read her memoir again. I've read it twice, but I'm sure I could dig up even more things. I have like pages and pages of research. Yeah.
Have you ever met anyone who knew Fanny Brice?
Yeah, actually, I've met a lot of people. I've met a couple of relatives of Nick Arnstein. I haven't met like the immediate family of Fanny's. I think she has like a grandkid that's still alive. But I've met like people who have worked for the family. It's kind of crazy. I have been to her house on Long Island. So the house that's mentioned in Funny Girl, and I mentioned in my show as well, that Nick bought for her, like really cheap. And she ended up renovating the house for quite, a substantial amount of money. And then he wanted to open the stables, obviously, because he was a gambler and for horse racing, and that never happened. But I have actually been to that house that they talk about, because the owner, we've met through a series of events as well. So it's been cool. People just kind of like come in and they're like, oh, we knew this person of Fanny, or we, you know what I mean? We were related to them in some way. I actually have a friend who I didn't know until recently is related to Billy Rose, and Billy Rose is a cousin, I believe, and that's of hers. And we're friends, and I did not realize that right away until she told me. So that's kind of cool. So yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Life really is 6 degrees, isn't it?
It is it's insane. It's insane. Yeah. It's a very small world.
Just as a tangent, because you do so much with Stephen McCaslin. How did that come about?
Well, funny enough, Stephen saw me do One Night with Fanny Brice off Broadway at St. Luke's. So he saw me do that show and was taken with me, and he had posted he was doing a production of Rags on Facebook. This is many moons ago now, and the power of Facebook. And I love Rags. I love the musical Rags. And I think I must have commented on it as a mutual friend had posted that, and he saw that I commented on it. And then he approached me because he was a fan from seeing me and Fanny, and invited me to see Rags. I saw Rags, and then he was like, I'm a fan, will you do Lift? And then I ended up doing Lift many moons ago, which was the American premiere of a British musical. And then I ended up doing all of his plays. So that's how that came about. So yeah, Fanny keeps giving back.
I just have to tell my Rags story every time I get a chance.
Please.
I saw Rags on Broadway, and I was in that audience that went to the TKTS booth and protested its closing.
Oh,
the
wow.
entire audience was so taken with this musical. We actually went to the street and protested. So yeah, Rags held a very special place in my heart.
I love that show. I love it.
I was just talking with Kimberly before we started. I grew up listening to Fanny Brice on the radio as Baby Snooks. I remember hearing it very well. We listened to it every Sunday. And I remember thinking, well, how is a grown woman playing a little bitty girl? I had this, I was, 8? And I had this vision of her walking on her knees. And but I thought that's a nice memory. Yeah. She
was pretty spectacular, I will say.
Hi, Kimberly. This is Leslie. I saw you in Ghostlight in 2015.
Oh my gosh, no way.
I did.
That's amazing.
It was such I loved it. I loved it. It was a great, very polished workshop production. And, I wondered if it was going to continue, if it was going to pick up. I haven't heard anything since then, but you were just great.
Thank you. So I played Fanny Brice in Ghostlight as well, for those that don't know. It was workshopping pretty ongoing for about 3 years. with a bunch of people, and we did many readings of it. Right now, from what I know right now, it's on the back burner, but I think it does have a trajectory of continuing to move forward in the future. I'm not quite sure when that would be, but that show definitely holds a special place in my heart as well. Like the music is
I just loved
pretty
it.
spectacular. Yeah. So we'll see. But it was at Nymph, and then it did about 3 Broadway backers auditions with Rachel York and myself and Carolee Comello and a bunch of people. So we'll see.
Yeah, I hope it does.
Thank you. That's exciting. That's so great.
Kimberly, that's fascinating, and I think you're really great in that part. So thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
And we will watch you for even more decades because obviously we're all fans of yours.
Yay! I love that. Thank you.
Thank you. And now turning to our next guest, and right now you have a show going on called Mrs. Cage, but we know you in the past because Mark saw you a long time ago in a play called Back, and he's not here right now, Ed Rubin, saw you in The Glen with our wonderful Glenn Loney, who we love, American Theater Critics Association, Outer Critics, Dramatists. We love our Glenn Loney, and so it's like, we've watched you through the, and of course there's the Shakespeare conspiracy, which I love because everyone knows I hate Shakespeare with a passion. So to see him as a dithering idiot and have all the stuff being written by Marlowe was great. But now we're going to talk about Mrs. Cage.
Okay,
which you are doing with your mother.
Yes, I am. Yep.
Which is
yeah, so we started during COVID. You know, we both run very, very small theater companies, and we were talking a lot about what the future of theater looks like, what it's going to be, how to operate. And at one point she said, I think the only way to do it is to do a one-person show. And I said, that's really weird because I had the same thought. What if we both did one-person shows but kind of work together, pool our resources. Hers is in Louisville, Kentucky, where I grew up, and mine's here in New York. And so I thought, well, we could just use some resources, pull some resources together to make, a wider audience, outdoor permits, like what are we going to do? And it eventually molded into, why don't we do a two-hander for safety purposes, because as your family, they could be in your pod, so it minimizes the risk of COVID. And then we thought, well, if we're going to do a play, but we can't have an actual audience, then we should just figure out streaming. And luckily, Dramatist Play Services that we got the rights from, they hooked us up with Showtix for You, which has a great video on demand streaming. It's an easy process. You just upload it and call it a day. But it sort of came about very quickly once it started happening. But it was just sort of a fascinating process to go through.
So how did you come across this wonderful Mrs. Cage, which originally was done with Anne Bancroft and Hector Elizondo?
Yep, on American Neighborhood Playhouse on PBS. Well, we started reading a bunch of two-person plays. We were reading a bunch of one-person plays, and then we started going through our old stacks and emailing each other back and forth and reading different plays. And we came across this one, and she read it and really liked it. And then I read it, and I thought, well, this is super relevant to today. If we're talking about gun violence, we're talking about policing. There's absolutely a Karen aspect of sort of white privilege. How dare you do these things to me, or try to take me to task. So it was just a lot, and it was very, very fraught with interesting themes, and so it was the one that we chose.
Oh, you should go into the plot and tell people what Mrs. Cage. You keep saying Mrs. Cage.
Yeah,
What and who is Mrs. Cage?
Mrs. Cage is written by Nancy Barr, and it is about a woman, a middle-aged woman, who has an experience that sort of breaks her in her life, and she commits a horrible act of violence. It's sort of confusing how it comes about, but she commits a horrible act of violence with a gun, and she is in a police station with a lieutenant who I play, Lieutenant Angel, and it's sort of an interrogation, but it goes from just the crime very quickly into sort of a character study, a psychological study of Mrs. Cage, but you also learn a little bit more about Lieutenant Angel throughout the process as well.
You might call it a shirt tale.
A shirt tail, exactly. I'm wearing a button down.
Because she's very obsessed with ironing her husband's shirts. That is her life, is ironing those shirts just perfectly.
Yeah, she says, I love the line, pressing the dickens out of his cuffs, where she just does it every day. I love that line.
I like the language of it. I mean, it's like old-fashioned language, but it's got a modern flair. I mean, brazen-faced. How often do you hear brazen-faced? I love it.
That's what, yeah. I mean, it was written in the 90s. It premiered in 1990, and so it was written in the late 80s. But we didn't have to change anything. We didn't have to do very much to update it, unfortunately, because of, I guess, depending on how far we've progressed in one way or the other. But yeah, I mean, so the language is a little bit old-timey, antiquated, but it works because she is a very specific person. She's a very specific, sort of wealthy, privileged woman. And she, of course, would speak this way, or her family, her help, her daughter. Of course, they sort of speak in this hoity-toity way, which I think is really a funny dynamic to a police officer and how a police officer speaks, and just sort of cuts right to it. There's no beauty in the language. It's very direct, very sort of attacking. So it was fun.
And I like the way you use children illustrations to tell the story in the beginning. Was that part of the play, or was that your idea? I mean, and who did the drawings? I love that part.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, so it's in the script that they are supposed to be childlike, crude, and primitive. And they tell you specifically what the moments are to flash the photos. Nancy Barr tells you when to do it. And so I had an artist, someone that I know very well, Christopher Curdy. He did the art for us, and he came up with these, they just look like they're just little stick figures, And we decided to make it more connected to the daughter, to Mrs. Cage's daughter, Elizabeth. And when she talks about the butterfly and how she drew this butterfly, and that even though it was crayon, it was very specifically a butterfly. You could tell it was a butterfly. And we thought, okay, well, that's the energy we want from these drawings. You could tell that they're a little manic, a little crazy, but, so yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that the lieutenant's name was Angel, because then at one point I thought, is she dead? Is this like, the angel interrogating before she went to heaven? Was that supposed to be misleading on purpose, you think?
I love that you just said that. Our director really geared us toward that, specifically in certain moments, so that we really wanted to play with reality. We wanted to establish that while we are, the language is fairly straightforward, it seems very realistic, that we might not be exactly where you think we are. We might be in this woman's head. We might be figments of her own imagination. We might be existing in a place that's afterlife. Is it a limbo? Is it a sort of hell situation? So yeah, his name was Angel, and we sort of leaned into the confession-y, really communing with you and your higher spirit or lower spirit, depending on where you think she belongs.
So what else after we finish this, are you and your mom going to collaborate again? And you have a company called Fledgling Company, is that the name of it?
Yeah, so
how did you come across making this little company in the first place?
Yeah, so my company is Fledgling Theater Company, and my mother's theater company is Eve Theater Company. I started Fledgling in 2016 as a sort of a reaction to Donald Trump's presidency. I thought there's clearly the way that the country is going, or how the country feels, it feels like we're going to hear less from marginalized people. We're going to hear a lot less. We're going to sort of, the air is going to get taken out of the room, and it's all going to be about older straight white guys. And so I decided to start a theater company. The first play that we did was Nikki Silver's The Altruists, which was about protesting, but also about very self-centered, sort of off-kilter protesters and crazy actresses, and how everything sort of ultimately you end up being pretty selfish. And so that I wanted to produce that play, so I started the theater company, and then it just sort of grew into a look at, with Shakespeare Conspiracy, we looked at history and presented a different view, obviously, of Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe. And then with the Glen, which I helped co-produce, that was a retelling of Glenn Loney's story through the playwright's eyes who knew him. So it was sort of a different look at his life. So I started this just to show, just to give marginalized people stories, voices, sort of a focus on things that you weren't going to necessarily hear a lot about.
Oh, I certainly appreciate, because Glenn Loney was near and dear to my heart.
I got to know a lot about him. He's a really interesting person.
Does anybody else want to say something?
What was it like working with your mom? And had you ever done that before?
It was wonderful working with my mom. She's been an actress for longer than I've been alive. So I watched and learned a lot. It was great. I mean, I was staying with my parents when I was back in Kentucky. I'm back in Brooklyn right now, but we did the 14 days and the quarantine, made sure that it was just the two of us and that we were healthy. We did all the proper precautions that we could. But we would just get up in the morning and over tea, like run lines, or like, every now and again, my dad would be hanging around and we'd go, oh, what do you think about that moment? Do you think it's like this? And he would go, oh, I don't know what you're talking about anymore. So we had a great time. I don't know about my dad, but we had a great time.
Does he do anything with theater, or is he totally out? He does.
Yeah, actually, he's an actor as well. My parents met in the theater. They met in Lexington, Kentucky at a theater called Studio Players. And my dad was doing lights and my mom was in a play. I think it was Joan of Arc. And so they met when they were like teenagers.
Aw, that's so cute.
Did you just hear my cats? They are, sorry. Okay, sorry. But anyway, it was wonderful. It was wonderful working with her. It was terrific. And to answer your question about something next or later, I really enjoyed this process, and the video on demand is going pretty well. We are the streaming. We're getting good feedback. This is our first foray into doing anything film-wise. So when we were looking at those two-handers and those one woman, one man shows, we have a couple more up our sleeve that if we decide to do it again, we've already got material. So we'll have to see where it goes.
Are you still keep going on doing for the marginalized people now that Biden is our president?
Yeah, I still think that's going to be, he's still an old straight white guy. So it's not, Kamala Harris, very, very cool. Her being in office is fantastic. So, I'll just have to see, the answer is yes. I'll just have to see what sort of stories are not being told and try to give voice to, to people, to stories, to lifestyles, to, marginalized people. And there will always, unfortunately, be marginalized people. So just having to find those stories.
Matthew, that's really great. And I think it's wonderful that you have a family, your entire family is involved in it all. That's really cool.
Thank you
so much for being with us.
Of course, thank you for having me.
And now here we have Jay Michaels to update us with more theater that's going on right now.
Greetings, this is Jay Michaels, and this is another installment of Indie Influencer on High Drama. Okay, we all love The Crown and Queen's Gambit and all of the other goodies on Netflix. But don't you feel that once in a while we should just stop and maybe read something? I got just the thing for that. Robert Villegas, the sage of Playbill.com, is now one of the leaders of a new monthly theater magazine called Encore Monthly. Their exclusive content takes you into the wings, behind the scenes, and to all the places theater people come together. Encore will be delivered right to your door and sure to be a collector's item. Speaking of collector's items, Artie Cabrera has assembled the titans of the fantastical nature for his immersive periodical, Gravity City. This amalgam of Starlog, Famous Monsters, and Mad Magazine has created a world of science fiction featuring writers and artists whose talent will make them legends in no time. So see them there first. There's also a novel series that goes along with it, so the reading can go on and on and on. Encore and Gravity City subscriptions make nice Christmas gifts. Now, as you head back to the screen, go to Channel I, which goes live at the top of 2021. This multi-platform destination for all things independent features 2 interview sites and programming spotlighting the worlds of off and off Broadway, indie film, webisodes, and indie TV, as well as powerhouse authors of all styles, and even programs on fine art, wellness, and memorabilia. I am independent. I am I, Channel I. And I am Jay Michaels. And this has been Indie Influencer on High Drama.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about Shakespeare and Marlowe, but we don't have time. Next time.
Yeah,
Oh.
have me on again. I'd love to talk about it.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Kimberly,
You.
Nice meeting everyone.
doing more original Baby Snook stuff. It would be perfect for
I know,
podcasts.
I was thinking about that too. Yeah, that's like a whole nother project on my list. Yeah, thank you.
And, you know, the Shakespeare and Marlowe is ready for revival, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, you really should bring that back and do it longer because that was so good.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Okay. Well, then I'll have to call up the author and see if he's okay with that. I'm sure he would be.
And you know what? That would work on Zoom too, because I mean, it's sort of like stationary in different sets, but it's still, you don't have to move around too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when we were doing it with Mrs. Cage, we just had 3 cameras that covered the majority of the stage. And so I think you're correct. With Shakespeare Conspiracy, it was sort of like, we only had about 3 locations. So as long as the cameras could cover all of the stage, then it might work.
And it was a tiny little stage too.
It was a black box, yeah.
Yeah, it was Theater Studio, the one on the 5th floor at Theater Row, the one on the top floor that hardly is ever used. It was there that it took place.
Yeah, and we switched the staging so that instead of sitting in just the audience, we had half of the stage across the audience.
Wasn't Jeremy involved in that from the Wild Project? Yeah, I love him. I love that show. Now I remember.
Yeah, he
We went together. I loved it. He did a great job. He was the producer, I think.
Yeah, the producer, and I also played Thomas Walsingham.
Okay. You should
Christopher
play
Marlowe.
Marlowe.
I should what?
Play Marlowe.
Oh, all right. Well, listen, since you
Yeah.
guys said it, I'm doing it. I'm gonna do it. This is great.
Yeah, invite me. Don't forget.
Thank
Okay,
you,
of course.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay, bye, Jan. Feel
Bye-bye.
better.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And our next show is coming up in December 5th. And we'll have more wonderful people to talk to. And there's lots of theater. Check out my drama for stuff that's going on. And